Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Daniel Barr here. He is the co-founder of Space Computer, and Space Computer is a satellite-based secure compute protocol for cryptographic applications using tamper-resistant hardware. Space Computer Protocol serves as a root of trust in space. Welcome to the show.
Cheers. Thanks for having me, Stuart.
Yeah, so I love it. It's right in the name. There's a computer in space. What does the computer in space do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So something that you hear a lot about recently is space-based data centers. And interestingly, space-based data centers is kind of a hype. It's very resembling of when mobile platforms were just getting started and like phones were a hype or blockchain was a hype. And then the way we're building space computer out and it's related to this meta is space-based data center is somewhat a solution looking for a problem. It's not really competitive to work on building a data center in orbit. Yes, it sounds really compelling when you say like, oh, free energy because you put something out there. But the reality is that you then need to account for the fact that you're sending hardware there that you won't be able to maintain. You'll have to account for about factor of 40 kilograms of peripheral cooling and solar array infrastructure for every kilogram of compute unit, right? So then it becomes a question of what is the use case that this is really compelling for? And it's not every use case where high security guarantees is one of those compelling use cases. And this is exactly what space computer is. Similar to how you have mobile phones, the analogy was it's a small screen computer with a pretty crappy keyboard in the early days. So why should you want it? But then you realize that the fact that you have the mobility, location services, it's like something really compelling and there's completely new use cases that are open. Similarly, blockchain, right? Blockchain is a slow and inefficient database, but then you realize that once you look at codifying trust and creating root of trust as a tamper-resistant thing, then it's compelling. Similarly, data centers in orbit, it's like it doesn't make so much sense. But then when you look at building a root of trust in space and giving super high security guarantees for applications that are space native as well as Earth, you realize actually, yeah, there is a use case for space-based data centers. So this is like a broad mental model there for what we're doing.
Very cool. And so I did a little bit of study, and apparently you guys have a layer 1 blockchain, and the layer 1 blockchain is out in space, and then the layer 2 where the compute actually happens is on Earth, terrestrial based. And so is that right? Is there a layer 1 on the satellites?
Yeah, so compute also exists in space. It's not that it's all on the layer 2s, what we call uncelestial. The layer 1 is still a settlement layer and smart contract platform, very much like you have Ethereum or other layer 1s on Earth. It's more that because of the constraints of space, the capacity for compute and the bandwidth is rather limited. And that means that augmenting the compute with a layer 2 on Earth gives you the high performance that we're used to and required to provide.
So what does the layer 1 do? What is the security of space or of a computer in space that gives you?
Yeah, so there's this concept called trusted execution environment, TEEs. Every so often you hear about them, oftentimes where particularly the zero knowledge crew and other cryptographic communities like to hate on TEEs because TEEs rely on physical security rather than logic or mathematical security for the compute. And that means that you have certain attack vectors that are more exploitable if you have physical access. Now that changes when you put your TEEs aboard a satellite, and that becomes a TEE in space that gives you the highest security guarantees possible. Suddenly, like being able to reach space is very difficult. Now, not only that, like you have one TE in space, you can still say, you know what, some really wealthy actor like Elon Musk can decide to go and abduct a satellite. That's true, actually. That's why it's tamper resistant, not tamper proof. But add another layer of distributed systems. So if you have a constellation of those, then you have the redundancy that we're familiar with from blockchain ledgers, where you can hypothetically take one node out, but nevertheless, the ledger will persist because it becomes something that is decentralized, right? So these are kind of like the two pillars there. And the thing that is provided is the TE aboard the satellite, space TE, or now we're working on something new that is space fabric.
Space fabric. Okay, I want to talk about that. Before going there, it's funny because the reason why we got connected is because I went to a tea party, TEE party, during Dev Connect, put on by IC Exec and Oasis, who
Yeah,
are in this very, very niche world that I only found out about because a year before that, one of my Argentine friends told me all about them. And so the tea party was really funny, but it kind of gave me a much better understanding of what a tea actually is. And then I was talking to a colleague of yours the day after, and he's like, "Well, we got teas in space," and so and then I took notes of the slide from the tea party, the slideshow, and they were going through a big exploit that happened, and apparently the only known tea exploit that happened, I think it was a simulation or something like that, but they actually went and exploited the hardware physically. So it requires a physical access to the system. And now, so when I read that you're putting it in space, that actually makes sense. So we could go down the T rabbit hole, like what it is exactly that allows for that sort of a trusted execution environment. Or we could talk about space fabric because I like the name of that.
sure. I maybe like to give a very layperson's historical introduction to TEs as I see them from my perspective. And we can talk about fabric to the extent that I can talk about it today. So personally, my background is in physics and semiconductors. So I was really interested in how chips are designed at the lowest level. So thinking about the physics of single layer of atoms and building transistors with the ever miniaturizing capabilities from the semiconductor industry. Now, I remember that roughly 2006, 7, if I remember correctly, Intel, which is at the time and maybe still today like one of the largest semiconductor manufacturing, chip manufacturer companies, they came up with this concept of, you know how you have in any computer CPU, so central processing unit. They came up with this concept of creating a separate compartment on every CPU that would be a secure enclave, it was called. So suddenly, like you have a separate region in the processing unit that would be allocated for certain sensitive type of computation. So then, like if you were to run normal things that are slightly less critical, then you can run them on the CPU regularly. And then if you were to have things that we're very familiar with today, like private key management, like signing transactions, etc., you would want to manage them in a different region of the processor. And you would want to make sure that things don't get exported out of there, etc. So they actually physically allocated in the architecture, like a different region. And that very quickly became a standard. And basically by now, pretty much every chip manufacturer, like in your phone, the processing unit and every computer now from pretty much every manufacturer includes those secure enclaves. And then over time also, it became widely adopted in different sectors, the obvious ones being financial industry. So something that is quite common in the financial industry is to have on-premises hardware security modules, or HSMs. And that means that essentially very much like what I described there with the small scale single CPU. They would have their normal servers that do stuff. Actually, on each server, there's typically also secure enclave. But then they would also have those hardware security modules, which is a dedicated compute with higher security guarantees that provides for those more sensitive type of compute interactions. And out of this came the whole TE domain, where you suddenly have the ability to separate between types of compute, and you'd want to have this powerful protection of certain compute with a dedicated hardware. Now, one slight point of controversy around it is that because of the reliance on the hardware security, the physics of it, that means that hypothetically, if you were to gain access, and for example, like I used to work with electron microscopes that, you could view things at a single atom resolution, right? So then imagine if you gain physical access, and then if, for example, you can do some forensics and uncover the chips and extract certain positions of the circuitry, and you have the domain knowledge to then essentially get the secret out of the chip physically, right? Obviously, it's much harder than people imagine. Like I see sometimes in the chats in the TE community, people think, "Oh, it's like get a electron microscope and like you're done." In reality, it's a lot more complex. But besides that, it does bring questions that are very valid. And one of the reasons the SDK people like to grave dance TE is they basically think about the security as something that needs to be mathematically proof. Like you just cannot hack it. And it's true, except when you rely on ZK solutions, you need to engineer each of them independently. There isn't a generalized compute ZK solution. And ZK in general, like what ZK gives you compared to TE, like ZK gives you it gives you the verifiable integrity of compute. It basically tells you like, okay, you can have a proof that the integrity of the compute has not been compromised. It's impossible to compromise. And this is why it's such a powerful primitive. Yet, every such ZK solution would typically need to be engineered independently. Whereas what TE gives you that is a huge advantage over that is that it gives you the generality. So if you get to the place where indeed you trust the hardware because it is physically isolated, for example, then you no longer need to engineer a specific solution. You have general purpose compute that is secure. The only question becomes like, how trustworthy is this hardware? And then the argument goes, if you have the physical access, the trust is somewhat relaxed. If you don't have the physical access, it's a very high degree of trust. And that's essentially like what we're working on with building the space-based TE.
And so that's the situation right now, like inside of the finance organizations, inside of, well, yeah, actually we could talk about the phone too, because the phone essentially there's a T in here, or there's a T in the server in Apple's both. Okay, interesting. And so, but you're like, in order to do the electron microscope, they would need physical access to an electron microscope and to this, and to the server on Apple's thing. Like, how many different layers of physical access would somebody need?
Yeah, so that depends already on the specific application and how it's set up. But I'd imagine, for example, your biometric data is stored probably on the secure enclave on your device.
Okay.
It shouldn't be going there. Like there could be, I know now with passkey, there's like already ways of secure transport and everything.
Wow.
But the meme goes, think about the data center. Data center essentially, it's like a enterprise grade secured warehouse where you have all those server racks and they are essentially giving you, like they're storing a lot of sensitive information and they perform compute on this sensitive information. The meme in the community goes that the data center security essentially is the guy with the Glock, right? Because essentially if someone does get access to it and passes the guy with the Glock, then it's a bit it's no longer something you can trust. Now, guy with the Glock is one such aspect, but then you also have what if there are certain internal staffing compromises, right?
Yeah.
Like you have exploits, and there's like very cool sci-fi book by Cory Doctorow about exactly that. There's
Ooh, what's it called?
someone that it's called Red Team Blues. So there's like
Oh.
blue team, red team in hacker culture. And he was describing a scenario of a TE-based blockchain where someone from the manufacturer of the TE exploited the decryption key. And there's a whole lot of like, romance and stuff describing it as sci-fi and good stories go. But yeah, that's a very known fact. Basically, if you have a data warehouse that Amazon or Apple or Intel or Alibaba or you name it, they secure it and they work with the manufacturers, right? Like if it's Intel, it's the manufacturer. If it's TSMC, then someone there has access to decryption key, and hypothetically, secrets can be revealed, right?
Yeah.
So it's more a
Mm,
question of like human error, right? Like human compromise. And one of the main motivations and arguments in what we're doing is that you want to have the benefits of the TE, but you don't want to have the exploit or attack vectors that the TE on Earth exposes you to. So that's where it comes from.
very cool. And how do you guys? I imagine the blockchain also allows you guys to be trusted as well, like some sort of verifiable means of trusting you guys as the providers of the service, right?
That's a good question. At this stage of space computer, it's early stage. So most of what we do is rather trusted. Yeah, it's like run as like we're hand holding all of it. It's the early days of development. But
Yeah.
ultimately, the objective here is to get to the same mode of operation as you would see with Ethereum, right? Like in the early days of the Ethereum network, it was maybe run by the foundation ran like a number of nodes, and the boot nodes were run by the foundation. So that was kind of how people think. But then ultimately, you have the incentives for the network to be run and operated by public third parties,
Yeah.
which means in our case, I believe that at some point, particularly as the space sector develops and the cost per launch and cost for specialized space hardware drops, it should be possible for you to basically get a satellite server up there, right? And be a part of
Wait,
a network if you wish.
oh, interesting. So it's not just okay, got it. Yeah, so it's not just your satellites as space computer. It's the idea that anybody can launch a space computer up and serve as a node inside of this layer one blockchain.
Yeah, that's the objective. Like obviously
Yeah,
right now, there's
it's
still
you
a
guys.
bit of
Yeah,
a gap between where
yeah,
things were
exactly.
like really nascent just a few
Yeah,
years ago. Now space is really hitting. There's like more
yeah,
and more
yeah, yeah, yeah.
possibilities.
Interesting.
And then like fast forward 10 years from now, I think that spinning up a server, which gives you the required spec, would be maybe a little bit more involved than doing it on Earth. Yes, but not crazy. Not crazy. It's becoming extremely accessible.
And yeah, I was joking around. We have a community here in Buenos Aires called AI Whisperers, and we essentially are teaching people how to maximize their understanding of how to use LLMs to build whatever they want. And so for the past 2 years, we've been focused on vibe coding, essentially showing them how they can actually just build applications from scratch, usually just prototypes. It's getting easier and easier and easier. And so now it's basically like pretty easy to spin up a prototype, whereas 6 months ago it was somewhat hard. And so now we're getting into hardware, and so I'm doing it myself, and then I'm teaching people how to do it. So this is my first sort of Alexa, sort of my own version of Alexa that I can trust, because I've well, who knows, maybe there's some stuff from China with the ESP32 that I got inside of it. But basically, so I've been getting into hardware, and so the next year we're going to build a robot, have people build robots, because the other thing about LLMs is they can teach you how to do things, and that's the real thing that I find a lot of value in, which is that it can teach me how to know what that thing that I showed you was. I also got this one, which is like a mesh network with a long range antenna, which
Nice.
was pretty cool. And so we're going to build a robot in 2026, and then I was joking that in 2027 we'll launch our first satellite. And so yeah, it's like putting satellites up with computers on it is really interesting. Is there an incentive mechanism that you either have now or are planning in to build it so that it incentivizes people to put satellites up there?
Yeah, so not yet, not right now, but the direction is very intuitive, I'd say.
Mm,
Think about it in the same way that running a Bitcoin miner is not something that people would do at home, yet it's possible to own a portion of a pool, right? Like even if you have just one ASIC, so you could mine at home and be a portion of a bigger pool, or running a Ethereum validator. It's not something that you need to do on your own if you don't want to have the 32 ETH. You can also get a staked ETH and essentially get a portion of the upside. Equally, the future that we envision for a space computer and how it would operate with the satellites being co-owned by public is that imagine that you are able to stake in order to fractionally own a satellite that provides those secure compute
cool.
services. So very much the same line of how blockchains operate on Earth, just aboard satellites.
Okay, so now I want to go back to something you mentioned in the beginning, which is that space is super hyped right now. We've got data centers in space. I forget the name of the company. There was one that actually put one. There is now like an NVIDIA chip up there in space. There's a lot of
Yeah,
interesting things.
Star Cloud.
What is it? Star
Star
Cloud.
Cloud.
And so we could talk about sort of the radiation, which is interesting. I just talked with Umair Siddiqui about all the radiation that goes into rad hard is what he called it, and like putting different redundancies inside of computers up there to make sure they don't get wiped out by a cosmic ray. Yeah, actually, wait. Let's talk about that. Is that something you guys are having to prepare or like is that something on your radar?
It's definitely something on our radar. It's definitely something that you have to be prepared for. Radiation hardening and generally space environment is different to Earth.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, a lot of the hardware that manufacturers are building for Earth is not really space grade, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? Like, for example, there are areas that are more obvious, solar arrays. You can put today very cheaply solar array on your house and harvest energy and store in battery, etc. But if you were to take that same solar array and put it in space, you're going to get pretty wrecked because usually the rate of defects that exist on those arrays is quite high. And here on Earth, it can tolerate it because heat transfer is efficient, so it can still be eventually cooled.
Wow.
But where you're on space, you need much higher grade of purity for those solar arrays in order for the defects not to become a heat center that then like will decimate your entire array. And so this is like one area that is already like wildly understood. But when you're already starting to talk about specialized hardware that is not something that's like commonly used by every object in space, then you start getting into this, for example, the guys that sent the NVIDIA H100 to space. I doubt that even NVIDIA at their scale manufactured these H100s with it in mind of going to orbit. So that does give you some concerns around would they have casing that allows for some added protection, or additionally to that, when you launch something to orbit, you need to think about lifetime. Typically, SLA is something like 5 years. It could be longer, it could be shorter, but it's not like you launched it and then like it's floating there forever in eternity, free energy. It's like this is a bit of the naive way of thinking about space. The reality is that ultimately things would deorbit, burn into the atmosphere, or break apart elsewhere. Um, and you need to account for that. So the more you're going into specialized hardware, the more on the one hand you're taking risks, and then you need to find creative methods of protecting it, whether it's like added shielding in the box you're packing, etc. Or ultimately, I believe that there will be more push to creating space grade standardization, so that
Mm.
the more we migrate compute to orbit, which is inevitable. It's just obvious
Mm.
inevitable trend. The more already manufacturers would have just grading for that.
So and I actually did an interview with Matthew Gialik from Astroforge probably about a year ago, and he told me about the Jetson Xavier industrial model that it actually does have. That's like NVIDIA's closest thing. And it's a little bit hardened, but it's not totally. Or it's no, it's just been extensively tested for radiation tolerance. So
Mm.
there is like one chip that is being used, but I like what you said. Why do you think it's inevitable?
It's inevitable. So I guess like this is maybe another rabbit hole, but have you heard about this concept, Kardashev type 1, type
Yep.
2, type 3 civilizations?
Yep.
Yeah.
But for our listeners,
So
maybe. Yep.
yeah. So maybe like a super rough primer there. Kardashev type 1 civilization is a civilization that is capable of controlling the planetary energy resources that it has at its availability. And that's like where we're at today. Like we're on the track for Kardashev type 1 civilization. Far from, but some estimates say like 200-300 years away. With longevity technologies, maybe we'll see it. Then Kardashev type 2 is star level energy control capabilities, which means basically we'll be able to utilize all of the output energy from the sun. And then type 3 is galactic, I think. So like you have multiple stars and stuff. But I think that just focusing on a type 1 for the sake of like being like down to earth,
Grounded.
so to speak,
Yeah.
um, then it's not so much only about the ability to exploit as much fossil fuels and whatnot. It's more about the ability to ultimately, like the sun is a much more obviously um, greater source of energy than anything else that is available for us. So then the obvious extrapolation of what do we need to do to get to the Kardashev type 1, there's this concept called Dyson spheres. I'm sure you've heard about it. Dyson spheres, in a very simplified way, it's imagine that you have a sphere of solar panels around the planet that essentially harvest the entire of the energy that is provided from the sun. But then one of the things that you see when you start going down that rabbit hole, that it's not as if you're just deploying solar panels and find a way to transmit the energy. There's all kind of mechanics that go into how you operate things at such a scale. Essentially like building cities, like mega
Mm.
cities in the sky. And then you would want to have um, whether it's AI in the sky, whether it's you would want to have certain like high security guarantees, settlement and smart contract layer in the sky, which is our area of focus. You'd want to have so many services besides only the energy harvesting. And then you basically start looking at, okay, what does this Kardashev type 1 civilization look like? And it kind of quickly comes to mind that you realize just the scale of compute that is going to migrate to orbit if we do want to indeed advance to Kardashev type 1. And I'm a believer, so like maybe I'm biased here, but it's obvious that it just makes more sense than having to do extremely messy, polluting things that are not sustainable and ultimately result in diseases and natural disasters. That I believe
Mm.
that technology is here exactly to build a more optimistic future rather than like trying to get us shorter attention spans scrolling on algos feeds.
It's funny because it's been a theme on a lot of episodes. I'm not even like trying to specifically focus on space, but the last I think this week publishing one episode on robotic arms that I did a few weeks ago. And so like there's a guy Aaron who's orbital robotics where they're going out and figuring out how to like capture satellites and remove space debris and all these different things. And so a theme that has been coming up with these space podcasts is that 1968 we put a man on the moon, or no, it was earlier than that. It was 1962. 1968 was when everything started to collapse, and sort of like the that positive, optimistic technology energy from the moon landing and from all that kind of dissipated in 1968. And then since 1971, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And so like the optimism about technology is like gotten really bad, and that's like it's understandable because since 2006 2007 technology has been used to basically totally eviscerate everyone's attention span on the planet, not only and to distract people and eviscerate the attention by like plugging into our base emotions. And like I'm noticing that Twitter has become this place where it used to be sort of not very well governed as a company, and so it was like actually somewhat good social network because it was governed quite poorly. And now Musk has come in and turned it into what a social network apparently should be, which is just like let's just extract everybody's attention and do engagement. Like there is some good stuff on Twitter. I'm learning a lot about AI. Actually, I'm not finding that many guests anymore on Twitter. It used to be a great place to find guests, but every time I go in there, it's now like this machine that's built to distract me. And so is every other social network. Like it's all just it's just meant to do that. And so that's like a cynical, not a great future that we're building, and it's been that way since 1971. Particularly with nuclear power. Nuclear power is just like a lost. We could have solved a lot of our problems if we had focused on nuclear power. But now it's coming up again. Like the space thing is coming up again because now we have an economy in space. And I really like what you guys are doing about the finding a good niche, because I've asked a lot of people like, what is the niche? And asteroid mining is one niche. Orbital robotics is another one. Like besides communication satellites, which is what's primarily up there, communication and photograph. Those are the two main types of thing. Now with Starlink communication becoming much, much more bigger, you got Amazon getting their one up there, their competitor to Starlink. Got the Chinese who are going to enter as well. So I really like the niche that which is like high security computation. Is that what you'd say the niche is?
Pretty much. I mean, then the application of high security is the settlement in smart contract. So imagine that you have gazillion of space compute services, and then you need to create a marketplace for them. You need to be able to orchestrate it. So you have to have something that is public. You don't want it to be only hosted by. Yeah, sorry.
These smart contracts, are these smart contracts for operations in space?
So it's a bit skeuomorphic how we're approaching it. Initially, you need to provide things that are easy for people to understand for what's relevant on Earth. But ultimately, the more compute is migrating to space, the more it makes sense to already be an arbiter of space economic activity, so space native protocol, basically.
Okay,
Kind of like think about like when Ethereum started it, the meta was crowdfunding because it came in the Kickstarter, Indiegogo era, right? And then ultimately people would still think about it as something that is relevant for the traditional way, just like crowdfunding in a new digital way. But then you see that over time, it's very obvious that it's a lot more digital native oriented. Yes, there's the real world asset meta too, but like generally speaking, it's a lot more digital native oriented. Similarly, the way I see it is we're starting from this a little bit more skeuomorphic mental model where the services that are focused, for example, we have the Cosmic True Random Number Generator, which is something that you can have a randomness beacon that's packed into let's say like a gaming or password manager or DeFi applications. But then ultimately, for example, we have now work on key management services. So then ultimately you're looking at a suite of tools that it's becoming a general purpose secure compute platform that is used for not just the things that we're familiar today, but the things that emerge as they find the need in space native economy setting.
So that's really interesting, and I want to go into that cosmic random generator thing because in my research I basically found out that Chainlink requires a random generator to do something with their Oracle system. It's like, what was it? It was like you need to prove that something was random rather than having a third party like say that it was random, because then they can cheat it and then it's not decentralized. And what you guys have done is a cosmic random generator, uh, guaranteed by this T. Is that correct?
Yeah, so maybe at a high level, randomness, it's a very interesting topic because randomness is critical for many cryptographic applications.
Mm.
For example, if you look at Ethereum today, you have block building as something that every time you select a different block builder, and this process is supposed to take some kind of randomness input in order to not create discriminating selection of the leader, right? The block producer. And today, many of those randomness solutions are what's called pseudo-random. So
Mm.
it's not really random. It's
Yeah.
taking some source of randomness that is not really true random in the sense that it's not not entirely stochastic process. Whereas when
Interesting.
you're looking at cosmic radiation, it is inherently a stochastic process. And then if you are harvesting it from a physically isolated location, then practically you have a Poisson process here that gives you a source of randomness that is as pure, as true as possible. So
So
it's
the random
fantastic.
the random number generator is cosmic. So like a cosmic ray is setting it off. You're harvesting cosmic rays. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, basically imagine, for simplicity, imagine that you have a circuit board that has some small fluctuations that are influenced by cosmic radiation. So you cannot predict them. You cannot actually um, say, okay, I'm gonna be deterministically predicting what would the cosmic radiation influence on this circuit board, right?
So the cosmic rays. Okay, that's really interesting. Um, so you're actually using the thing that is this the single event upset is when a cosmic ray comes in and destroys a semiconductor, but you're actually using the cosmic ray to create a random number. Can you actually go more into that? Like how does it,
Yeah.
how
Okay.
do you
So
harvest a
let
cosmic ray?
let's not confuse. Let's not confuse. What in terms of the randomness, you don't need to get to the scale of fluctuations in a circuit that destroys the data. This
Yeah.
is like one thing. It's not a problem to have a resolution that is basically configured such that the fluctuations would be just at a certain band. What you're describing as sometimes it's called bit flip events.
Mm,
Imagine
mm,
that you have data that is stored, bits are ones and zeros, so like high and low voltage. And then you have a certain instance
mm,
where radiation compromised, corrupted the data. This is a bit different because you're talking about typically a region in the, let's say, a transistor that got influenced by it, and that transistor could be like in the storage of your private key, and that's it. The key has been
yeah.
compromised. How
Yeah.
you prevent for that is like one you mentioned earlier, the discussion, space grade radiation hardened, or alternatively there's the redundancy that you can sometimes pack different type of like different amounts of the same. And then again, like it depends on what kind of radiation events. In some instances, there's massive solar flares that you need to be
Mm,
prepared for, and you'd want to basically like shut down your circuitry so that you'd be
wow.
exposed less, because there'd be like less things in the flow. Uh, so yeah, these are two different things to an extent. Yes, there is some commonality, but it's not the same type of magnitude of radiation, if you wish.
So what you've done is sort of like jujitsu the cosmic ray into giving you a random number, a truly random number.
Yeah, and I mean, look, these things are not something that need to invent from scratch. These things are to an extent available on many types of chips. You'd have
Whoa.
the ability to get a randomness source, and then it's like what is the input that you're putting into it.
Okay, that's super interesting. I noticed that you're also you did a philosophy. You got kind of brought into the crypto world because you were doing your master's or your PhD in quantum computing, and got attracted into this world of crypto, which led to where you're doing right now. I would love to go on a little side quest if you want to on uh, just quantum in general, because I've been reading Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and it is such an interesting book to go because it goes through all the, I think a lot of people probably, if they've gotten this far in the podcast, have like heard of Thomas Kuhn and heard of the revolutions that are in science, and you have this sort of like Copernican revolution where everybody was following Ptolemy, and he posited that the Earth was at the center of the universe. And then Copernicus comes and says, no, that's not true. We've got the sun. It's the heliocentric model, and we're just kind of floating around the sun. And that just destroyed the understanding, the explanations for everybody inside of this community of scientists. It was a pretty small community at that time. Now, each revolution is really interesting, and then you have Newton, and you have the quantum stuff come up, and the quantum stuff is so hard to figure out. And actually watching a professor give his intro to his class, where he's like, Feynman didn't understand the quantum stuff. I don't understand the quantum stuff, and this class that I'm teaching, you guys don't even know what it is, but soon enough, in 7 days, you won't understand it either. So I'm sharing my ignorance of quantum. Is that your understanding of what quantum is? Like, do you feel like you understand it? What is going on? I wanted to ask a specific question related to, it's like something with Bohr or Planck. Like what? It's just the electron that the electrons going around the atom, and and as soon as we try to gather information with it, with instrumentation or anything that tries to figure out what's going on there, it causes a decoherence of the electrons or of the system, the quantum system, right? Can you what did I get wrong there, and why is it so weird?
Yeah, okay. There's a lot to unpack in what you're bringing up here. How to begin? So, yeah, quantum mechanics is it's a very interesting type of physics and the mathematical theory behind it as well. Um, Newton hasn't discovered it probably because it was a bit early and there were a few gaps, and he started discovering the first parts of the
Mm,
gap.
mm,
Um, and like technology was also not there. So then, even if you could hypothetically discover some things on a paper in theory, it was like harder to also like make progress in observations. Maybe to address one of the things that you brought up there about the electrons wave function, or generally like quantum particles wave function and quantum as a whole, like one of the things that change when you start looking at the quantum realm is that you're moving to a less continuous and more discrete
mm,
physics. So
mm,
if for example we're familiar with mechanical processes, or like let's say you're looking at a train that is moving, you can
mm,
say it's moving at a continuous speed, and you can predict all kind of things that come from it, right? Um, Whereas some of the funny things that happen in the quantum realm is that once you go down to small scales of physics, you start having discontinuity, if you wish, or like things starts being a little bit more discrete. And
cool.
and like what you mentioned there about electrons. So for example, because you have small particles, say the nucleus or the proton and the electron, then you have forces between them that
Mm.
then create only certain allowable positions for the electron to be, or like generally quantum particles each have different type of property, etc. But let's, for simplicity, talk about the electron. So the electron can only be at a certain region, orbit, that's what we call it, like a certain orbit. And then not only that, also we see that in more complex atoms besides the hydrogen, you would have also different types of orbits, so like energy bands that the electron can be in. And then how to measure and observe things, if we were to measure, then you realize that you wouldn't be able to put your fingers at the precise position. Like, let's say you're looking at the car, you say like, here, it is precisely here. In the electron or like a quantum particle measurement sense, you're unable to look at it with that degree of precision. You're looking at it probabilistically. And the way to describe, and that's something that you have in the formulation of quantum mechanics, it's by describing wave functions.
Uh,
Except the funny thing is that these particles behave with duality of both particles and wave.
yeah,
So
interesting.
suddenly, like, you have this weird scenario where mathematically things are described as wave, but then in terms of measuring, you want to be able to measure them as particles. And then what you described there is that the collapse of the wave function, this is one of the postulates of quantum mechanics, is that so long as you did not measure, there is a certain wave property. The moment you measured, the collapse of the wave function basically gives you a certain state. So we call it the state. Typically, you would have like a wave defined as a superposition of states, and then the moment you measure, it collapses to a certain
Wow.
state. Um, this is maybe like a bit like going to one specific aspect of quantum. Yeah, like a lot of it, what Feynman said that I do resonate with is say like quantum mechanics is not something you understand, it's something that you learn to live with. And like Einstein, I think famously said something along the lines of God doesn't play with dice because of the probabilistic formulation of measuring things in quantum, because it's like you don't have the deterministic view of how physics would work. You have probabilistic view of how physics will work.
Uh,
So it was
Interesting.
something that gave a lot of mind-bending observations for scientists. But maybe like in the context of compute and your question about
Yeah.
that motivation and stuff. So I'll share like my very brief background and like motivations for that brought me to where I'm at today, and maybe this is something that should also like my personal biased belief, but like it should give some insight, I believe. So originally, when I started my career and studies, I was very interested in the lowest level physics of compute. And to
Mm.
me, what it meant was transistors. How are transistors being built? How are semiconductors and all of the elements that go into computers are manufactured, engineered, the chemical processes. So I studied physics and materials engineering and went into researching and being an engineer in the semiconductor industry. And for some time, I did not think about so much else. I just like was so enamored with just that. It's like a fascinating world, seriously. And then I remember at one point I got exposed to biology, somewhat randomly. I took a few courses in biology and ended up taking synthetic biology and ended up doing my master's in a lab that was mostly related to biophysics. And I brought the semiconductor and materials engineering background into that. And I built sensors that are capable of
Mm.
single molecule resolution sensing.
Wow.
And the objective there, like what I found was like, okay, biology is in some respects a completely different machinery and compute platform. So I wanted to kind of understand how we can start creating a lot more analytical and quantified understanding about a platform that until now is somewhat not analytical. Like, so if you look at like
Mm,
physics became a very analytical discipline. Chemistry went from being a somewhat qualitative into like very analytic, and you have like pharmaceutical
mm,
industries. Biology now is undergoing that analytical revolution from being a relatively qualitative science into like extremely analytic science. Now, obviously, like it's a higher and higher, or sort of lower and lower resolution that you go from, like physics that is like dealing with atoms, to chemistry that is dealing with like small molecules and stuff, to like biology that is already dealing with proteins and crazy scale stuff in terms of physics.
mm,
So it's like it's natural that the more the complexity advanced, the more hard it is to actually really get more analytic. Anyway, so after getting more exposed to biology, I realized that I don't really want to do wet labs. So like I was spending some time in my research in wet labs, and that's okay, but it's just like I realized I want to go back to like my roots, which was solid state physics, and the
mm,
more like inanimate, like low level atomistic things. And one of the things that was very interesting for me at the time was quantum computing as a new type of compute platform. So like the thread that connects all of my career and scientific curiosity is compute.
mm,
Um,
mm.
so I basically went to pursue research in quantum compute hardware, and was working on building logic gates based on qubits. So qubits is the short for quantum bits. So they're not operating like the normal bits that have ones and zeros. They have the superposition that we discussed earlier,
Yeah,
where they
interesting.
can be certain
And that's four states,
ex-
right?
that can be in various different states depending on the uh, atom or system that you're looking at. In the simplest realm, it's let's think about it as something that can be a little bit of one and a little bit of zero at the same time. Think about it this way. But then, but then when you're looking also at like more complex type of atoms that have, let's say, a heavy nuclear and like many different electrons, then you start looking at very complex states as well.
Yeah, interesting.
Um, but anyway, back to then like starting to think about engineering quantum systems, and why are even quantum compute systems interesting? It's because there are certain problems that they solve in much greater efficiency compared to what we call classical computers. Um, and much of today's cryptography is based on this type of um, algorithms that if quantum computers would be powerful enough, or like if we would be able to engineer a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, a lot of today's modern cryptography doesn't really stand.
Mm, mm,
But I think that one interesting thing to comment here is that you hear a lot of hype around quantum computers, and even NIST already gave the guidance to not continue with ECDSA cryptography and start moving to post-quantum
wow.
cryptography by the year 2035, and already like by the year 2030, it's like they do it in a phased manner. So people are taking it seriously, and rightfully so. But at the same time, it's not like a entirely binary. It's like the ability to have fully general purpose
Yeah,
quantum machines
yeah.
is not something that is very obvious that it's possible, not clear when. Yet at the same time, the ability to have certain quantum supreme machines is definitely
Mm,
something that has been demonstrated, and it's like being demonstrated in more domains. Um, yeah, that's just to say, like whenever you hear about hype in certain domain, like take things with a grain of salt. I hear a lot of skeptics. One of my colleagues is now a professor in Germany, a quantum compute systems professor, and he's exposed a lot of unethical science in the realm
Mm.
of quantum computing, including some, you hear about a lot of the hype from Microsoft. They released, I think, earlier this year or last year, the Majorana particle stuff, which is
Oh,
very
interesting.
debatable. There's quite a lot of credible people in the domain that believe this is a absolute scam and essentially like a taxpayers' money funding like massive grift here.
Yeah.
So just like take things with a grain of salt. I'm happy to share more of this, like a specific content over Telegram later. Yeah. Anyway, and like that. At one point, I had a hobby of blockchain and crypto. I did not realize this would be an industry, but the reason I took interest in this is that I realized it's a new kind of compute platform. It's
Hmm.
a compute. It's a compute that essentially is enmeshed software, hardware and software,
Mm.
with markets. It's like you
Yeah.
have in one organism markets and software and hardware. And then like the inputs are typically inputs that are free market oriented, whether it's trades, whether it's certain assets and how they're like credit and lending and whatnot. And all of that somehow like is enmeshed with, let's say, oracles and like complex things in the software realm too. So it's like it's a very unique type of computer where the inputs and outputs are people working in the free market economy in one or another way, right?
Wait.
So,
What are the outputs in that visualization? You have inputs are free market origins enmeshed with oracles, a very unique type of computer. What are the outputs?
oh, the same. The inputs and the outputs are essentially activity in the free market.
Okay. So it's
Think
a
about it. You have a distributed computer, let's say Bitcoin or Ethereum is a distributed computer,
yeah.
that on its own, it doesn't matter. What matters there is that you have activity, whether it's in the case of Bitcoin, the energy grid offsetting or store of value use case, or in the case of Ethereum, the smart contract operations and trading and finance and whatnot, NFTs, DAOs, and all of the inputs that go into the system are related to activity that people attribute in those different applications and use cases. And then equally the outputs, right? Like you basically have the the fact that suddenly even the simplistic thing of a store of value, you have people do all kind of activity, run the network, and store something in the network, secured by the network, and then you suddenly have a increase in price if the belief in it becomes something that is more widely adopted, and then suddenly like the network grows in terms of compute resources. It's like it's an organism that is so unique, it's so fascinating.
Ah, man, I really like that framing. It's like a cyborg free market as a species. As a species, the blockchain is now enmeshed in our market activity with the delivery of value to a lot of different things. Now, uh, and so did uh, the crypto element that you started with, but there's a relationship between the quantum and the crypto. I guess it is the T, right? For space computer, like the T is how do you connect your crypto hobby to space computer?
Yeah, so look, space computer, just like the name implies, also it's a natural evolution of the world computer. The rationale was that you have a general purpose computer that is public resource, right? That was the whole breakthrough of what Ethereum was. If you had, so you know the concept of task specific computers and general purpose computers. You
Yes,
know
yeah,
that concept?
yeah,
Yeah. So in that realm, like if in the classical world you had Alan Turing that came and said like computers can be something that can be applied as a general purpose, and that was the Turing machine. Equally in the crypto world, you had Bitcoin is not a network that is supporting general purpose compute. It's a network that is very rigid and has a very particular task specific application. right?
Mm,
Keep the ledger of the Bitcoin network, just like
yeah.
keep the ledger of transactions and keep a good account. And this on itself is a very powerful primitive, but it doesn't actually allow this open-endedness of a canvas of programming, right? And then Vitalik and the movement for Ethereum, there were also ideas before, but like Ethereum was the one that managed to pioneer and really open it, came with this concept that expand beyond one task and create a compute platform that is general purpose. And that's the reason for calling it the world computer, because it's a platform for any applications, right? And you can have applications that Vitalik even didn't predict running on it in a similar way to like Turing didn't predict Uber or any like Google, etc. So then what we realized is that space as a domain is rather different. You cannot think about it as yet another region we want to expand the world computer, because you have different constraints.
Mm,
And we want to be able to build a general purpose computer that is specifically dedicated for these properties of space. So whether it's the communication latency, the fact that you have objects moving in orbit, you don't have them as a stationary validators. So then like consensus suddenly becomes different between the nodes. It's not just simply allowing for nodes to be expanded from the existing networks on Earth. And then like the rationale, okay, so what does a space computer look like? So we started with developing the primitives for what it is. And like, frankly, this is an open-ended journey. The idea here is to adapt and understand what can be engineered at every point in time. But very much from that rational place of Bitcoin and Ethereum came when you already had Facebook and Amazon and everything was like rather established. And that came as an afterthought, as a response. Here, what we're seeing is that there is a reacceleration of the space era, but the space industry in itself is still nascent. So we
yeah.
want to be able to start already at this early stage, build something that is public infrastructure in mind, like essentially a computer that isn't just provided by a centralized company for a specific application, rather
Yeah.
a computer that is owned by the public and um, facilitating the marketplaces of different celestial compute services.
Brilliant. The next one we can focus on essentially like what a space computer will do in 5 to 10 years. That sounds really interesting. But thank you so much for coming on the show. And you guys got a new podcast called the Frontier Pod, right? Is that right?
Yep, yep. We're hosting the
Yeah.
Frontier Pod.
And it's on Space Computer on YouTube. And you can also go to spacecomputer.io. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks, Stuart.